Welcome to the second video on British education, where I will talk about the role of abstract thinking in British teaching and learning, something that applies to both private and public British schools, or as the Brits would have it, to public and state British schools. One can think of abstract thinking as the ability to talk about things that are not present, that do not even exist, as a way of generalizing, uniting groups of concrete objects, or even abstract ideas. An example of this is the meaning behind the word dog. A dog does not refer to a concrete animal like the one here on the left, but to a group of animals that can be very different between them, as shown in this image below. They all present a series of characteristics that allows us to group them behind the word and meaning dog. In education, the unfinished work on abstract thinking by the Jewish and Russian Lev Vygotsky at the beginning of the 20th century has influenced the curriculums of different subjects and helped the scaffolding and division of subjects into topics and concepts. Let's bring some examples of abstract thinking in different subjects. In language or English, it could be types of words as nouns, verbs, tense, types of words that would help later with linguistic structures, such as coordinated or subordinated phrases. In maths, a clear example is the commutative property of addition for natural numbers, rational numbers, real numbers. The commutative property of addition helps later in solving algebraic equations. In science, we can build from simpler concepts such as speed more complex concepts such as momentum, which would be needed for understanding Newton's laws. British schools have traditionally specialized in teaching by induction, that is, through the use of examples getting to the abstract idea. An example can be shown through teaching the commutative property of addition, working through different examples with natural numbers, decimal numbers, or rational numbers. The same abstract idea appears. Given any two numbers, the result of the addition is independent on the order of the numbers. In other countries where there is not a tradition of teaching by induction, it is much more common to see it being substituted gradually from the first years in primary or elementary school towards teaching by deduction, that is, expressing the abstract idea first and then apply it to numerous examples. In this slide, we can see that the abstract idea is announced first, that is the commutative property of addition, and then it is applied to numerous examples on different types of numbers. Teaching by induction or teaching by deduction do not seem to be so different with respect to each other. One could say that there is no clear advantage into preferring induction over deduction or the other way around. The same information is given. What varies is the order in which knowledge appears through the examples. So we could talk about approaches to teaching in order to get the same result. But in the last 40–50 years, British schools have gotten rid of the development of abstract thinking, and British teachers all over the world believe that abstract ideas can only be taught once we are 16 years old. That is, the commutative property of addition is no longer taught in British schools. In the example of the dog, it would mean not teaching what dog means, because the abstract idea is not being taught. Instead, British schools concentrate on a simple example, like the bloodhound on the upper left side of the image. The concentration on a single example explains how students that go through British schools get the appearance of knowing a lot, when in reality they are unable to apply knowledge that they have not learned. Consequences of not developing abstract thinking can be seen across subjects. For example, in English, as English grammar and analysis or parsing is not being taught in British schools, it makes it impossible for foreign students to learn English in the said British schools. Foreign students have a better chance of learning English in the schools of their home countries, like me. The fact that English grammar is not taught makes it harder for a student in British schools to learn a second language. That is, it becomes an unattainable goal. Moreover, it is a fact that English grammar is being taught by foreigners in British universities. Foreigners coming from very different countries, such as Italy or Germany, as in this example, Dr. Sackle. That is, in the mother country of English, English seems to be known by foreigners, but not by the British population. The consequences in maths is that instead of understanding definitions or techniques and being able to apply them, memorization of numbers is more important. It is the case of prime numbers, where primary or elementary students are asked to memorize the first prime numbers that can be found before 100, given no importance at all at the definition of a prime number and how to find them. Mathematical techniques appear as magical, without connection nor logic. As maths are at the base of new technologies, programming becomes an unattainable goal without the mathematical knowledge. The same could be said of science and statistics, that also need mathematical knowledge at their base. In science, examples and experiments are being taught as if they were not connected by any underlying theory nor laws. Because students do not know simple algebraic techniques, maths are being taught within science, but only as they are needed, adding more confusion as to whether maths can be applied outside maths. In the country of Sir Isaac Newton, not only famous for his works in physics, but also for helping in the development of calculus, British teachers believe that science can be done without maths. This happens in British schools in the 21st century, a century where science is dominated by the use of statistics, big data, and as much maths as possible. When one looks to Bloom's taxonomy, British education seems to center in the lower part of it by only using memorization, as understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating would entail a certain degree of being able to generalize, classify, compare, that is, going up the ladder of higher order thinking skills means being able to produce and use abstract thinking. Students going into British schools risk certain types of immobility due to the lack of development of abstract thinking. Geographical and economical immobility due to not being able to compete with students taught in non-British schools, and cultural immobility, as our ability to produce and use abstract thinking is part of culture. It is possible to coin a new term, Brexed, from the words Brexit and education, as the uses and practices in British education that separates it from other educational systems in the world. In this context, we have only analysed the role of abstract thinking in British education. We can conclude that students from British schools have between 10 to 12 years of disadvantage compared to students in non-British schools. The lack of development of abstract thinking in British schools places British teaching and learning 85 years behind other countries' teaching and learning, where the theories of Vygotsky are still used. It has to be said that the lack of development of abstract thinking in British schools is being done with the aid of resources from the 21st century. The amount of these resources at British schools seem to attract the admiration of parents and foreign teachers that have never taught nor learned within those British schools. So British schools have become the living proof that having high-quality resources is not linked with high-quality education. Finally, we have seen that the lack of development of abstract thinking entails a low-quality education. Therefore, British education could be considered as a synonym of low or poor quality education in the 21st century.